G'day, I'm Steve Starling. I'm a fishing writer and TV presenter, and some people reckon I've got the best job in the world. Maybe they're right. I had my first article published in the Old Australian Angler when I was 16, and by 22 I was editor of a fishing magazine. Now, a big part of my inspiration for choosing this career path came from reading the work of older writers who I greatly admired. People like Ron Calcutt, Rod Harrison, Ross Cusack and Dick Lewis, to name just a few. But one man's work stood above all the rest, and it helped to mark him as the true father of fishing and outdoor journalism in this country. That man was my childhood hero, and he's remained an inspiration to me down through the years. His work and his philosophies have touched the lives of tens of thousands of Australians, many of whom might not even recognise his name. Yet he's helped to give us a deeply held sport fishing ethos and to shape the very language that we use to describe our passion for this pastime. This is a small part of the story of that man, a man they call McSea.
The reasons I gave up writing had as much as anything to do with health problems. Also, to a certain extent, I wouldn't say I'd written myself out, because fishing is a big subject. I made the decision without a whole lot of problems. I said at the time that I'd never retired before and I might not be very good at it, but I'd try it and see what happened. And it worked out okay. I'm quite happy in retirement. There's no shortage of young fishing writers around, and I like to encourage them anyway.
In 1963, Vic McCristal started a career that would see him become Australia's best-known outdoor journalist. A career that would span more than 3 decades of writing, research, exploration and adventure. Many believe he did more to pioneer sports fishing in Australia than any other person.
I was born in the Depression, or actually in 1928, but I had a wonderful childhood. It was tough by modern standards maybe, but I recognise now that it was a wonderful way to live. I had a free run of the rivers and the hills and the bush. It was natural to me. It was just, I never knew anything else. One of my major interests has always been exploration. What probably carries over with me is the fact that I've largely always been an observer.
The son of a carpenter, Vic McCristal grew up on the Ballinger River on the New South Wales north coast, the only boy in a family of 6 children. The McCristals were a close family, and he was taught to read before he went to school.
I came from pioneers on both sides, on my mother's side and my father's side. The first McCristal into the country was a convict, Edward McCristal. My mother's people essentially were of Danish extraction. They were free settlers.
She was a great lady, our mother. She was much more gregarious than our father. He was not a people person. Her friends were always important to her.
My mother was a totally different proposition to Pop, but he was a very highly respected, very well-liked man. Everybody who met him, whatever it was that he gave off, people really responded to. The town where I grew up, Bellingen, has changed mightily these days, but it's probably one of the most beautiful valleys. And yeah, no, it was a good place and a very safe place to be brought up.
Bellingen is beautiful, and there's a range of mountains behind it and a river running through it, you know, a lovely clear river where we used to swim, and of course where we used to fish. We were given free rein. We just roamed wherever we wanted around the hills. My mother always said that when she heard the song Born Free on the radio, it always made her think of Vic. And he played, he rode his bike everywhere, and he went fishing, and he was a hot shot with a catapult, and I think he still is, to be honest. We always thought that the sun shone out of Vic, and I think our parents thought he was special too. I think he just generally lived a lovely, free sort of a life. The headmaster at school told him that Vic was capable of doing any career that he wanted. He was quite capable of doing, that he was clever, and particularly in as far as literature goes. But he left school there because he had a disagreement over an incident that happened, and which he felt that he was unfairly treated, so he left. And that was when he got the job at with the local paper.
During my teenage time, I've worked in the Commonwealth Bank, worked for my father. I joined the ambulance service as an honorary bearer.
When he left the Courier Sun to go to Sydney to work in a bank, I know he didn't like it. He did not like being stuck in an office. That just was not him.
So Vic returned to Bellingen, where he learnt carpentry from his father. That trade would take him to the mountains of the Snowy River Scheme and the outback of Western New South Wales. But he soon discovered a new calling.
My first article was published in 1954. At about the age of 24 or 25, we were at that time working in the outback, and I did trips to the coast every year on holidays. And on one of my early trips down to the Genoa, I caught some big bass. I wrote an article about it for the old Outdoors magazine. And at that time, Outdoors had a very good editor, a fellow by the name of Jeff Carter. And Jeff paid me £8 for that first article, and I wasn't long before I staged a rerun. Again, at that time, I was reading a lot of Outdoors magazines, and used to be a bit disgruntled at what I read, and believed that I could do better myself, and ultimately had a go at it, and it worked, and I enjoyed it. I took on the job as a Commonwealth Meat Inspector. I wanted a job that would give me time for writing, and that worked out. I had 5 years and 4 months as a meat inspector.
But Vic McCristal's hunger for travelling and writing about Australia's fishing frontiers continued to grow. His passion was to become his life's work.
I took up the full-time writing in 1963. Clive Tulk and I left Burke after June the 30th. Clive was one of the shooters that I had known. He was obviously a good companion to have on a trip like that. We both had Holden utilities, and we had similar outlooks, and we were very independent.
He indicated to me that he was preparing to leave his job at the abattoirs, and he was going to embark on a period of time to develop the Northern Territory, Western Australia, barramundi fishing, and other types of fishing as well, of course. But mainly I think it was to do with the barramundi fishing, and he had made contacts in Western Australia and in the Northern Territory prior to the leaving on the trip, so he had an idea what it was about, where we were going.
Drove up through the back of Queensland, across the territory, did across one of the old beef roads to the Kimberleys, put in time in the Kimberleys, learnt our barramundi fishing on the way, then up to the Northern Territory, camped around Darwin Harbour and out in what is now Kakadu, and did travel out around the Arnhem Land coast with Leo Hickey. There we came back across through the Gulf country, and I headed off across Cape York to Cairns, discovered the rainforest country and headed south from there.
That great adventure forged a lifelong mateship and changed the nature of sports fishing in Australia.
Introduction of the lure fishing that Vic introduced into that area was the beginning of another era of fishing in the Northern Territory and Western Australia, without the shadow of a doubt. And from that, because Vic, after that, he wrote the Great Fishing with Lewis, and that was a further development that came from this experience that we had there together in that area in 1963. So yeah, for sure, that was that was a development of the whole barramundi fishing, or top-end fishing as we know it today, without a doubt.
I realised with travels, I realised I would either have to live in the north and travel south, or live in the south and travel north. Investigated the prices of various blocks of land along the coast, and I came to Cardwell. I built a small house on it in '65. The advantage of Cardwell was that it had wonderful shelter from the sea. It had a great range of fishing. You could, there was new stuff everywhere you looked. From after 1967 there was game fishing at Cairns, but before that there was all the rainforest fishing, wonderful stuff to explore, and wonderful new species to be promoted, such as the jungle perch, which has remained one of my favourites.
During his long career, Vic McCristal contributed thousands of articles, photographs and magazine columns for Australia's major outdoor publications.
Aspects of my time that are not understood are the fact that a fishing writer is first and foremost a writer. He's not necessarily more skilled than other fishermen. If people expect you to be the greatest fisherman, it's not going to happen. You can be the best writer that you can be, and you can communicate to your readers. That's the big thing. You take the reader along with you so that he's with you on the trip. An easy thing to say, but it's a difficult thing to describe.
Well, I think Vic actually inspired me to write. Having read Vic's articles, I would think to myself, I wish I could write like that. Vic had instead of a brain, Vic had a jewellery box. And up in that jewellery box, there were so many gems that he used to bring out in his writing. Simple sentences that may have taken only 6 or 7 or 10 words. He was so keen to explain what he wanted to say in as few words as necessary. He was, I suppose in a sense, and I mean this lovingly and kindly, he was a bit stingy with his words. Superfluous words, well, get rid of them, they're not necessary. Because it's his writing that's everything. That's the contribution that he's made to angling. He had a tremendous influence on all angling writers, not only the fishermen themselves, but on the writers. Written 5 or 6 or 7 books, I think, and each one is a gem on its own. It's informative, it teaches people how to fish, it makes them interested in going to places where they've never been, where Vic's been. And yes, I'd say that Vic was the doyen of fishing writers.
Everything that he wrote was honest and true. And he never used himself as a tool in his articles, he always used other people. And I think that's what made him stand out from most of the writers. I learnt so much about fishing and about this country by through Vic's articles, you know, by exploring. And it's just a wonderful world when you get out there and start exploring and travelling this country. Every time I read his articles, I learned something, and they made you want to get up and go fishing.
He's not only been a fisherman, he's been a bushman. He's a very, very capable bushman.
I learnt a lot from Aborigines because I understood fairly quickly, I think, that their fishing is absolutely different. Their skills are personal and they're immense. I was a hunter as well as a fisherman, and in fact I always regarded fishing as very similar to hunting, and the best forms of hunting are very similar to the best forms of fishing. And I used to shoot feral animals, quite a lot of those. The rabbits, the hares, the foxes, wild pigs. Wild pigs have been a great saviour for a lot of people. But I got rid of my guns after I came across to the coast here in 1965.
Vic, I'm sure, was dwelling on the future of a body that we could call the Australian National Sport Fishing Association. And their first meeting, I think, was in 1967 at a place called Yorkeys Knob.
The foundation of the National Sport Fishing Association certainly brought a great deal of satisfaction to a lot of people, but there were a number of people who had thought of it, considered it and could see the need for it, but nobody ever got round to organising it, and I was able to get it orchestrated. It was like putting a match to a petrol fire. It took off very, very rapidly, and because the need was there, it fitted the needs of fishermen at that time.
Vic and the others felt that maybe it should go to New South Wales and to other states throughout Australia.
We had about 200 clubs nationwide, including a couple in New Guinea and even one in the Cocos Islands.
And it spread very quickly because it was such a wonderful idea. To have sport fishing there where you could go and you could test your skills, and there were certain rules and regulations that we had. But one of the main things about it was that it was the beginning of catch and release, which is becoming quite a fad these days. It's a good fad to have.
In Queensland, I think something over half the fish that are caught are released. Things that we proposed all those years ago are now accepted practice. Sport fishing actually is not a question of catching fish on light lines or anything of the sort. It's a question of deriving maximum enjoyment and pleasure and reward from fishing of the personal kind, where you know that you've done the right thing. You look after a fish properly when you catch it. You put it back well and truly alive in the water, and that is down to your credit. That is between you and the fish.
He helped everybody. People that don't even know Vic are probably using some of his methods right to this day. He was always willing to listen, and listen carefully, and throw in little asides, of course. But he was a thinker. You could see the wheels turning inside Vic's head. He was a leader. He was the bloke that first introduced, I think the first, lure fishing for bream. And of course today, everybody thinks that they know all about lure fishing for bream. But had they been back there in those days, they wouldn't have, if it hadn't been for Vic McCristal.
He opened up the world, you know, to marlin fishing. He brought people from overseas and, you know, some of the film stars. Very similar to what he did with black bass in New Guinea. You know, he was one of the very few people to go in there and fish for black bass in the early days and to put them on the map. He opened up the baitcaster reels, and he also thread line.
Some of Vic McCristal's most challenging solo adventures were with his boat, Ngmadi, a purpose-built timber diesel vessel with a range of 1,000 nautical miles. He explored the Gulf of Carpentaria, Cape York, the islands of Torres Strait, and the Great Barrier Reef, applying modern sport fishing techniques to some of the most pristine waters of the Australian coastline. Remote islands, reefs and sand keys. Vic became a passionate fighter for their conservation.
Regrets are a fairly sensitive subject. There's one major one. I never got married. That was a major mistake. The thing that I should have done that I never did was keep a diary. And that's one of the things that I would advise young people to do. The diary is excellent value even if you're not a writer. I don't know, highlights of my life are probably learning experiences like the times that I spent with George Bransford, the marlin skipper at Cairns. I became very close friends with George. And I never stopped learning while I was around George. Encountered a few game fishermen, and considering that I was never a game fisherman, I was astonished to find that I was held in high regard there. So to me that is a big achievement. To other people it probably doesn't matter much. If I've done anything, it's perhaps to see that you could provide an opportunity to bring out the best in people so that they get more out of enjoying life. You look at what you've done, and if you know that it's okay, well that's, I guess that's a highlight.
Good role model example to people who wish to fish and care for the fish in this country. And I think that's probably a very major contribution that Vic made early on in his career.
I learnt so much about fishing and about this country through Vic's articles, by exploring. And it's just a wonderful world when you get out there and start exploring and travelling this country. I remember walking into the Clarence River in 1960 when I was 15-year-old, and it was just the most magical moment in my life. And each time I go to the Clarence now, I just walk down and grab a handful of water and throw it in my face. I feel like I'm home. Yeah, and that's what Vic's articles did to people. They just made you get up and go. You just wanted to see what was out there. And when I go to the Clarence, I always think of Vic, because otherwise I'd have never done it.
My advice to young fishermen in particular, do your thinking properly. That sort of thinking can't be really forced on you, or you don't get it through an education system. Get up early, learn to row a boat, learn to paddle a canoe, learn to get close to fish, learn to read the country that you're seeing, so that it's, if not necessarily an open book. You learn how to explore, and learn how to think, and learn how to see. If you can learn how to think laterally. I've never been one to accept just what I was told as dogma. One of the end results of that is that I'm not dogmatic myself about anything except the need to learn and need to explore. Incidentally, exploring can be done right in Sydney Harbour if you live in Sydney. The fact that there are people there doesn't stop any young person from exploring. There are new things to be learnt all the way, and it's constantly being done, and it's going on the whole time. And it's a case of a frame of mind, an attitude. Look at it as a way of life. Set out to learn. Don't accept what I tell you, don't accept what somebody else tells you, but learn to think. In particular, learn to think very honestly. That's the only thing that really works when you're out fishing or dealing with anything with nature. It's the truth that is the only thing that's going to pay any dividends, and it's been rewarding for me.
Hi, my name's Kim Bain and I'm an Australian, born in Queensland, and I now travel the world fishing tournaments. And I count Vic McCristal amongst my friends. I've been fortunate to have grown up in Australia and lucky through my family to have been exposed to the heritage of the sport fishing that we know in our country today. People like Joe Gospel, Jack Erskine with tackle, and most importantly, Vic McCristal through his inspirational, motivational and educational writings. And I've even been fortunate to have Vic edit some of my work in my early days. And now, as I travel the fisheries around the globe, I note that other countries have embraced their sport fishing heritage and give understanding to the works of the likes of Gray and Hemingway amongst others, that their efforts have shaped a sport and game fishing culture. It is my hope that we as Australians remember those who have shaped our fishing heritage down under. In particular, the most noted writer of them all, the man who opened up and influenced our lure casting and sport fishing character, and who led other writers and promoters to do the same. Fair dinkum, Vic McCristal.
But I just liked fish.